The Rothschild family joined the Orange House of Holland, royal family, to found the Bank of Amsterdam in the early 1600s, becoming the first private central bank in the world. In the 1600s, the Dutch with the Rothschilds built in a short time an immense colonial empire. They thus demonstrated the power of their navy, and this empire contributed to the economic development of their brand new country. Passed under Spanish and Portuguese rule around 1540, the Dutch began to revolt against their new masters in the 1570s. In 1579 they founded the Republic of the United Provinces of the Netherlands, whose independence would not be recognized until 1648. However, as early as 1595, Dutch sailors traveled as far as India following the road opened by the Portuguese Vasco de Gama. From then on, the Dutch colonial adventure can begin. In 1602 is created the Dutch East India Company, or V.O.C. So the V.O.C was to colonize South Africa and Indonesia and Suriname. The V.O.C therefore enslaved the predominantly Muslim Indonesian people in the mines and cotton fields and sugar cane. At present the Rothschilds own a large part of Sri Lanka where the population lives a situation of quasi-slavery and is exploited by the Rothschild family to produce tea. Finally, the French branch of the Rothschilds financed the colonization of Algeria and enslavement of its Muslim population from 1830 to 1962. The Company of the French Indies enslaved the Asian and African population in favor of French slave banks like Rothschilds and Scelara in Haiti. Today, among his direct descendants of slavers is Baron Ernest Antoine Scelara of Laborde, who owns several investment funds, and who was the president of MEDEF, Union of French Bosses, and Business Europe, Union of European Bosses. In addition, the Baron is one of the owners of a very large bank, NMSD, which is part of the conglomerate, ABN AMRO, in the Netherlands, which has collected the assets of Mallet Bank, itself very involved in the history of the slave trade. Gori, the Mallet Bank financed the expedition that allowed to conquer and exploit the island, and the colonial economy in the West Indies. The Scelara and Rothschild families organized the colonization of Algeria, its looting and the genocide of the Algerian people. Finally, the Rothschild family financed the colonization of Palestine and enslavement of its Muslim and Christian Arab population for the benefit of European Jewish settlers and Rothschilds. The English branch of the Rothschilds contributed to the slavery of Irish Catholics. The Bank of America, or Bank of America, belongs partly to the Rothschilds, such as the Bank of France, the Bank of Holland, and the City of London. The Rothschilds owned the Indian companies of those nations involved in the slave trade, like the banks. These families, who are currently the world's trillionaire families in power, have probably been the greatest slaveholders of all time in world history, but their involvement in evil and perverse trade has always been hidden until recently. In fact, historical accounts have been distorted to highlight the anti-slavery efforts of these ruling elites. Mr. Nathan Mayer Rothschild, Slavery and the Rise of Capitalism in the West. Nathan Mayer Rothschild was the leading London financier of his time. He was one of the founders of the international banking dynasty of the Rothschild family. He was born in the Frankfurt-on-Main ghetto, the fourth child of Mayer Emschel Rothschild and Gutel Schnapper. Apparently, he first worked as a textile merchant in Manchester, but was deeply involved in financing, borrowing and speculating on the Manchester Stock Exchange, a British city that was competing with Liverpool in London as the international capital of the slave trade. Having benefited so much from the slave trade and financing of the Manchester slave trade, he later expanded to the London Stock Exchange. From 1809, Rothschild began processing gold bullion in Africa and South America. He also speculated on financial instruments such as currency effects and government securities related to projects such as the theft of entire countries and their resources, later qualified as shameful as colonialism. However, in private, Mr. Rothschild, sneaky, almost created slavery. Documents recently discovered and revealed for the first time by the Financial Times of London show that Rothschild made personal gains by using slaves as collateral in banking transactions with slave owners. It is besides Rothschild who obtained the loan which finances the bailout of the owners of British slaves by the British government when the British government sanctioned slavery. The industry was abolished in the 1830s. The bailout of British slave owners would be the biggest bailout of an industry in history. In today's dollars, it is lower than the recent bailout of the banking, financial and automotive sectors. By realizing this financial coup de grace, which was tantamount to saving the entire economy of the British Empire, which was firmly based on the slavery of the African and Asian and American peoples, Nathan Mayer Rothschild became the undisputed master of Europe. Slavery and colonialism have caused the death of more than 100 million black Africans and the death of millions of Irish enslaved the Indians of Amurkayu, at least 100 million dead, and recent genocide in the Middle East in Iraq, Syria, and Yemen. Communism and Nazism also was financed by the banks, caused the deaths of 80 million Russians and 120 million Chinese. In all, the slave bankers are responsible for at least the death of 500 million human beings. All the wars, colonization, false revolutions, genocide, pollution, vaccines, smallpox epidemics, or plague cancers and famines, behind everything there is the Rothschild.